Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Spotlight on Security Tech Insights. Consider this: behind every breach, there are a lot of lessons around resilience and response that can be shared. And when we look at the real world impact of cyber attacks, really the most critical role in this is the incident response and readiness to bouncing back in a timely fashion. My name is Theresa Miller. I am the Senior Director of Technical Marketing here at Cohesity, and today I am joined by a very special guest. Joye, can you introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. I'm Dr. Joye Purser, Field CISO. Before coming to Cohesity, I was at CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. At CISA, I was the Regional Director of U.S. Region 4, leading field operations during the Colonial Pipeline incident. A lot of lessons were certainly learned there. Before that, I was at PricewaterhouseCoopers, a Big Four business consulting firm leading enterprise risk management for very large organizations. And prior to that, there was a decade at the Pentagon and as well as the White House. So this has imparted a unique security perspective that I love to share with customers and more broadly.
Joye, I am so excited for you to share insights, especially with your impressive background. Having you share those insights today is going to be invaluable to our audience. So let's not wait any longer. Let's dive into some of our questions today. So, Joye, are there any trends that you have observed that have led organizations to be able to resist ransom demands and recover more quickly?
Yes, I do believe that the private sector is gaining its sea legs when it comes to cybersecurity. And most importantly, is the ability to recover following an incident. And of course, that's where we come in because we're a company that develops software that enables backup and recovery. And I think what we're learning over the past 5 or 10 years is that it's almost certain that an organization will be hit in a breach or with ransomware or an insider threat. And there's a good chance that data could be exfiltrated or even deleted, whether on purpose or accidentally. So, for all of these reasons, it's extremely important to have a secure copy of key applications and key data sets to help keep the organization going. And backup systems are absolutely critical for that capability.
I really appreciate the mindset there, Joy. It it really reinforces the fact that organizations need to plan for recovery to be successful in getting around paying ransoms, for example, but also being able to get their business back online because with no data, there's no business. All right, so
That's
let's
right.
talk. Oh, go ahead.
I was also going to say, from a compliance perspective, there are a lot of regulations that have arisen in the past 2 or 3 or 4 years that are requiring organizations in the private sector to have robust backups and to report annually. So, for example, for financial entities and banks in Europe, the Digital Operational Resilience Act is in effect being enforced and requiring an annual report on backups. The state of New York, for example, also had cyber amendments that became enforceable last year for any financial entity operating in that state. And those also require evidence of the ability to recover and how the backups are being protected. So I think regulation and compliance is another key driver in organizations becoming more resilient.
Yeah. Do you think that is because government is mandating some of those changes, or is that specifically something else?
Yes, I think government and policies develop as a result of a perceived gap, either in security. So, for example, seatbelts. A lot of lives were lost because of people perishing in accidents for lack of wearing seatbelts. And so at some point, finally, the government said, okay, this is a no-brainer. We're going to now enact a policy in that you must wear seatbelts. And so that's really saved a lot of lives. So I see policies developing as a result of just no nonsense and responsible activities that need to happen.
That's awesome. I'm glad that enterprises and even our government have such a thoughtful mindset around that. So let's go ahead and transition into some of the lessons learned around breaches. Is there anything you'd like to share there from your experiences, Joy?
Yes, so I've been on staff for 2 years, and as the field CISO, I receive a lot of inputs from the field, and that includes our customers, as well as our account reps and our sales engineers. And I hear about stories where things went wrong, threat actors got into the network, and whether data was lost or the organization was able to restore its capability, its business. And so, yes, we have learned a lot in those couple of years that we've been tracking this closely.
So, are there any specific stories that you'd like to talk about, Joy? I know we've had, we probably aren't going to name any customers today, but just anything you'd want to dive a little deeper into?
Yes, sure. So a couple of years ago, we had a customer which was a large retail business in the food industry. It was a very public breach. And what happened was the threat actors got into the network and were doing damage Saturday at 2 a.m. So the middle of the night, usually backup activity occurs in the middle of the night, and they were deleting the backups. Unfortunately, the security operations center for the victim didn't catch the anomaly. And it wasn't until 24 hours later that they actually noticed that they were under attack. So, if only the backup team or the IT team had talked to the security operations center, the SOC could have tailored the rule to better detect that anomalous behavior, because backups were supposed to occur Friday at 10 p.m. And so that small time differential really could have saved this business a lot of grief. But the story ends well because the company did have an immutable copy of their data saved in the cloud. And due to this backup that the Russian gang could not access, they were able to fully recover, and restaurants in one continent were affected only one day. So really, in the end, it was a story of resilience and also an important lesson learned.
Well, that's amazing. I'm glad it was a happy ending. Listening to you, I was actually a little bit worried. But I think one other key point that I'd like to call out for our audience today is it sounds like they had multiple copies of their data. And so I think relying on one copy isn't always enough. And I think that's also a key takeaway that listeners may want to invoke on their side.
Yeah, you're right. There is a lot of upfront work that companies need to do to really identify first, what is the minimum viable company? In other words, what applications, what data sets must we have to continue our most critical operations? And in addition to that, they need to have a digital jump bag with all the keys and all of the core functions to be able to completely rebuild that minimum viable company if they must. And they must have a clean room in order to do it, someplace that is completely air gapped and isolated, that cannot be accessed by threat actors. And so it really requires a lot of preparation in order to recover in a responsible and effective way.
Yeah, those are all really great points as well. And So when I think about the customer story, I think you're saying that thankfully they had planned well and had run through some level of preparedness, whether it was that or otherwise, that helped save them.
Yes. And look, nobody's perfect, right? An employee, as much as we train our staff to look for indicators of compromise and to be able to recognize what could be a high risk link not to click or a potential phishing attack, things happen. Sometimes there's, disgruntled insider threats, just things happen. So this right of boom ability to recover has never been more important. And I do believe that the private sector, especially, is waking up to this fact. And so I think that that's where we see the trend of, of less ransom bounty being paid. And I think this is a great turn.
Yeah, I think so too. So let's talk about, there were a lot of really great lessons learned in that example. Let's talk about your top 2 tips, Joy, for being more resilient.
All right. So a lot of this is just basic blocking and tackling. So have multi-factor authentication turned on everywhere. And companies like ours ship our software product that is secure by default. MFA is on by default. You, as the buyer, don't have to think about that. Now, a lot of legacy applications or data sets, that is something that you have to plan around. And I was talking with an organization yesterday in the healthcare industry, and you know, acquisitions and mergers are a way of life. And with that comes a lot of security risk because he would find, old servers in a closet somewhere, and someone took a picture of one somewhere at a distant site where there had been an acquisition and said, hey, look at this. So those are all potential risks. So knowing where your data is and being able to identify data that might be sensitive, it might be protected health information that requires HIPAA compliance. So also being able to identify and classify your data as potentially sensitive is extremely important. Those would be my top 2 tips. MFA on and understanding your data. And it's much easier to say that than to actually deploy that, but it's worth doing.
Yeah, those are great tips. And as I reflect on, one thing really stood out to me as I was imagining that photograph of some of the physical setup. And I think enterprises don't always think about security being that physical hardware element as well. So I think it's really important to have had you highlight that, because it's full scale. It's not just the software and how you can harden it to protect the data. It's the physical element as well.
I agree. It's a good point. And both hardware and the firmware that help connect it to software, as well as the software for machines. In other words, operational technology, machines that not only are in manufacturing organizations, which I do predict a rise in American manufacturing, which is great, but also um, things in your own home, like sensors for your heating and cooling systems, things like that, even our vehicles, those all are integrated and all are at risk and need equal protection. And I think operational technology, or OT, is a huge risk that we'll see a lot more applications that help try and secure it. And I think that we'll see AI being used also to try and secure it.
Awesome. So, Joy, threat actors have really evolved their tactics. How do we counter them in this day and age?
I was just reading a threat report by a company called Picus Security, and every year they release a red report that talks about the top 10 threat actor techniques. And in addition to stealthy techniques such as hiding in plain sight, inserting malware into a normal process or normal application in order to obfuscate it. They're also using encryption to communicate in, out-of-band channels. They are deleting logs. So this stealthy behavior indicates an increase in sophistication, which we would predict, leveraging AI. And so I think that organizations need to use AI in order to counter that. And I predict that even though there was a whole lot of interest and excitement about large language models, we're going to really see indications of them proving themselves out in the security space in order to better collect large amounts of data, to be able to do penetration testing, and do a lot of things that have required just laborious human activity. And so that excites me as an effective countermeasure in the near-term horizon.
I like that. You have me thinking a little bit differently about how AI can really step in and be a positive force in that combat. Great. Well, any other threat actor tactics you think are worthy of sharing, or should we transition on to our final thoughts today?
Well, one that intrigued me was this this move from persisting within an organization's network. In other words, hugely resisting trying to be extracted from the organization, to a trend of just destroying, destructive operations, disrupting operations, so that threat actors consider cyber breaches as kind of a parallel tactic of warfare. So instead of kinetic warfare and launching bombs, they're also able to delete critical systems that are part of everyday critical infrastructure, whether it's financial sector, the energy sector, transportation, or telecom. And we've seen that play out, and I think that will continue. And so I think organizations that are critical infrastructure need to be on particular alert as targets for threat actors.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that, Joy. So do we want to talk a little bit about some of the innovations on the Cohesity side? What do you think?
Yes, yeah, I'm hearing about an innovation that streamlines recovery. And I would love for you, Theresa, to tell us a little about it.
Yeah, so as you really have alluded today, Joy, with everything you shared, recovery is key. It's the most important piece to getting the business back online. And cyber recovery, just because of all of the different complexities that are now impacting environments from a security perspective, like whether it's the backup that was impacted, or AI has stepped in, or it's double extortion. Recovery is more complicated and requires the coordination of multiple tasks, processes, and techniques. So around innovations from our side, we are putting forward some tooling that is really going to help with that. So if I were to just highlight a few of those points, first, I would highlight the ability to get back to a clean recovery point. So knowing that what you're bringing back is not ransomware infested, or sitting there with a virus, or holding some sort of attack that's been sitting there for some period of time. Beyond that, and this really double clicks into some of what you talked about today, Joy, is being prepared in advance. You had talked about the real world side of this, but also you highlighted some key points, right, around having your digital jump bag. So having a set of tools already packed up in a box could be physically, but digitally is super important as well, off-site. So that's the digital element of the jump pay. And that is going to help with any kind of rebuilds that you need to do. And then the other piece to that really is revolving around rehearsal and testing. So if we can orchestrate the ability to restore based on recovery points, as well as having that preparation in place, testing is key to getting back online quickly from any kind of outage, but most importantly, these cyber attacks.
Yes, and one thing that excites me about this innovation is that it is leveraging AI to be able to make an intelligent recommendation of the last clean copy. And some of those determining factors, for example, are the job risk score, the estimated data loss, the type of media that was backed up, the hash or malware scan status, and the time since the backup. All of those factors are things that humans would have to very quickly look at during a breach. And ideally, you would have planned in advance, and so you know what those things are. So we've developed a tool that leverages AI to be able to do some of that for you. So it's this, human and AI interface working together that we hope will enable much more rapid recovery.
Yeah, so stay tuned, all of you, for more on that. We are very excited to be able to share that with you in the near future. So, Joy, thank you so much for joining me today to talk everything about Behind the Breach. It's really been enlightening. I've learned so much from you today. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
And thank you to all of you for joining me for another episode of Spotlight on Security Tech Insights.